Good day, ma'am. I am Bahinting Larry M., your student in CA 200, Section A, Institutional Correction. So today, I'm going to discuss the Module 2. So these are the lesson. The history, philosophy, and objectives of imprisonment and the development of prisons. Sing Sing Prison, Auburn System, Pennsylvania System, 5 development of prisoners, forms of punishment, age of enlightenment, personalities behind correctional institutions, Caesar, Marquess of Baccaria, Bunicea, Cesar Lombroso, William the Conqueror, Enrico Ferri, and Clifford Shaw. So, Sing Sing Prison, maximum security prison located in Ossining, New York. In use since 1826, it is one of the oldest penal institutions in the United States. It is also among the most well-known in the country, especially notable for its harsh conditions in the 19th and 20th centuries. So this is the image of Sing Sing Prison on Hudson River at Ossining, New York. Alcohol and substance abuse treatment programs. Alcohol is a toxic and psychoactive substance with dependence-producing properties in many of today's societies. Substance abuse. Substance abuse may lead to social, physical, emotional, and job-related problems. The use of illegal drugs or the use of prescription or over-the-counter drugs or alcohol for purposes other than those for which they are meant to be used or in excessive amounts. Treatment dimensions. The terminology describing the different elements of treatment care for people with substance use disorder has evolved as specific systems have developed and as treatment has adapted to change in the healthcare system and financing arrangements. Important differences in language persist between public and private sector programs and a lesser extent in treatment efforts originally developed and targeted to persons with alcohol as opposed to illicit drug-related problems. So, treatment models and approaches. Historically, treatment programs were developed to reflect the philosophical orientation of founders and their beliefs regarding the etiology of alcoholism and drug dependence. Although most programs now integrated the following 3 approaches, a brief review of earlier distinction will help primary care clinicians understand that what precursor may survive or dominate among programs. So there are 3 historical orientation that still underlie different treatment models. So first, medical model, second, psychological model, third is sociocultural model. So medical model, it emphasizes biological and genetic or psychological causes of addiction that require treatment by a physician and utilize pharmacotherapy to relieve symptoms or change behavior, like disulfiram, methadone, and medical management of withdrawal. And psychological model focusing on the individual's maladaptive motivational learning or emotional dysfunction as the primary cause of substance abuse. This approach includes psychotherapy or behavioral therapy directed by a mental health professional. Sociocultural model stressing deficiencies in the social and cultural milieu or socialization process that can be ameliorated by changing the physical and social environment, particularly through environment in self-fellowship or spiritual activities and supportive social network. Treatment authority is often vested in persons who are in recovery themselves and whose experiential knowledge is valued. Anger management programs. The goal of anger management therapy is to teach people how to examine their trigger. It also helps people adjust how they look at situation. Successful anger management therapy develops healthy ways of people to express anger and frustration. Some techniques used in anger management therapy include impulse control. So impulse control, a condition in which a person has trouble controlling emotion or behaviors. Often, the behaviors violate the rights of others or conflict with societal norms and the law. So second is self-awareness. Self-awareness is the ability to tune in to your feelings, thoughts, and actions. Being self-aware also means being able to recognize how other people see you. People who are self-aware recognize their strength and their challenges. Third is the meditation. Meditation has a long history of use for increasing calmness and physical relaxation, improving psychological balance, coping with illness, and enhancing overall health and well-being. The fourth, frustration management, something by writing in a anger diary, crafting, drawing, painting, writing poetry, and other arts forms are all healthy ways to channel your anger into something fun. Turn on some music. Music has a powerful effect on our brains. Search for a playlist of relaxing or happy music to turn your frustration in a more enjoyable emotion. So, the music is very important also in this type of this topic. 5 is breathing techniques. Get comfortable. You can lie on your back in bed or on the floor with a pillow under your head and knees. Breathe in through your nose. Let your belly fill with air. Breathe out through your nose. Place one hand on your belly. As you breathe in, feel your belly rise. Take 3 more full, deep breaths. 6 is relaxation strategies. So, deep breathing, massage, meditation, tai chi, yoga, biofeedback, music and arts therapy, and aromatherapy. So, educational and vocational programs. Vocational educations or vocational education and training or BET, also called career and technical education or CTE, prepares learners for jobs that are based in manual or practical activities traditionally non-academic and totally related to a specific trades, occupation, or vocation. Family development programs stands for the right of young children and their families to live in communities that place concern for children's health, well-being, and high-quality education at the center of our civic agenda. And it also advocates for understanding that all children are born learning. We are committed to build child-centered educational system that honor this fact. We support the need to reform and align a continuum of early learning to public school education. Next is guidance and counseling services. So the major aim of guidance counselor services is to encourage students' academic, social, emotional, and personal development. To reach his aim, guidance counseling services help students get to know themselves better and find effective solution to their daily problems. Next is library and law library services. A library is a collection of materials, book, or media that are easily accessible for use and not just for display purposes. It is reasonable for housing updated information in order to meet the user's need on a daily basis. According to the mode of services rendered to the readers, libraries are broadly divided into four types. So, first is the academic library, second is the specific library, third is the public library, and fourth is the national library. So, recreational programs. Our active recreational programs provides opportunity for our children to participate in organized sporting events, arts classes, social programs such as cadets, clubs, chess, and occasional activities such as swimming, hiking, skating, tobogganing, and etc. Like this in the what you see in the slide, the picture. So religious services. A very important reason why inmates become involved with religion is to improve their own self-concept. Lack of a positive self-concept is a common problem with correctional inmates who may suffer from guilt related to failure in life, remorse from criminal acts, or from the pain of a dysfunctional family background, because the core of many religious belief includes acceptance and love from a higher being and from member of the faith group. Inmates often feel better about themselves if they practice religion while incarcerated. So, sex offender treatment programs. The sex offender counseling and treatment programs or SOCTP is a comprehensive program of counseling and treatment offered by the Department of Correction and Community Supervision for convicted sex offenders and other incarcerated individuals. The department identifies as likely to benefit from sex offender counseling and treatment based upon a study of their background. So the SOCTP is offered to those who have been identified as low, moderate, or high and high risk to reoffend. Individuals are assigned a risk level for treatment using a comprehensive process that utilizes both actuarial tools and clinical assessment. Temporary release program refers to a program which allow release a prisoner from the place of his or her imprisonment for a limited period. It helps in the transition of prisoners from prison to the community. So this like the the prisoners they transfer from other prison, but it's only temporary. Trauma programs. A traumatic event threatens your overall well-being, physical, emotional, or mental. Unfortunately, trauma isn't always obvious. Life-changing events and quick emotional abuse alike can have adverse effect on the li- lives of those who experience it. A trauma treatment programs and integrative life center helps individuals process, understand, and overcome issues resulting from traumatic experience. We offer an array of holistic and evidence-based therapies to treat mental and physical issues resulting from experiencing trauma. Incorporating holistic and evidence-based therapies gives you the best chance to heal and recover. Types of trauma. A person can experience trauma for many reasons. Trauma may be deeply personal and uniquely individual. In other words, other people cannot tell you what is traumatic for you. The inability to process emotions about a situation also can result a trauma. Trauma can include events where you feel threatened, frightened, abandoned, invalidated, supported, trapped, helpless, and unsafe. Some happening that can cause trauma like abuse, physical, sexual, emotional, or mental, neglect, witnessing violence, natural and human-made disaster, war, force, displacement, grief, separation, serious accident, school violence. Transitional Services Program, defined as educational activities and supports designed to assist students with disabilities to reach measurable post-secondary goals. The determination of specific transition service needs system from individual results of various age-appropriate transition assessments. The Transitions program is designed to teach independent living skills, including vocational skills, to students receiving special education services ages 18 to 22 years of age. From program activities take place in a variety of community settings including work site, the bank, public transportation, and many other locations. So, Veteran Services. The United States Department of Veterans Affairs is a cabinet-level executive branch department of the federal government charged with providing lifelong healthcare services to eligible military veterans at the 170 BA medical centers and outpatient clinics located throughout the country. BA provides a range of services to homeless veterans including healthcare, housing, job training, and education. There is a variety of persons why veterans are homeless, and BA is committed to providing solution to put an end on this problem. Volunteer services and programs. The Bayanihan Bayan Program or the BBP or the Voluntary Program of Government Services is a platform for private sector volunteering in government agencies and local government units by virtue of Republic Act 9418 or the Volunteer Act of 2017. The law mandates that national government agencies and local government units shall establish volunteer programs in their respective office to promote and encourage volunteering in government programs and projects as well as join government employees to render volunteer service in social, economic, and humanitarian development undertaking in the community or the Republic Act 9418 Section 12. So BBP engaged the volunteer assistance of the private sector in the implementation of government programs and projects for stronger partnership between and among the stakeholders. It was formulated through consultation with representatives of government agencies, NGOs, the business sector, and the academy who believe in the power of volunteerism as an instrument in propelling national development in all realms, in all fronts. So, Sing Sing Prison on the Hudson River at Ossining, New York, originally known as Mount Pleasant Prison. It was constructed in the village of Sing Sing on the east bank of the Hudson River, some 30 miles or 48 kilometers north of New York City. It was designed to provide additional prison space and to replace Newgate Prison. Auburn State Prison, the construction was undertaken in 1825 by convict laborers under the supervision of Elam Lins. Sing Sing's name comes from the Indian phrase Sin Seng. It means stone on stone. In 1901, 3 years after Edison introduced the electric chair at Sing Sing, the town changed its name to Ossining so people wouldn't confuse it with the jail. He officially became head of the new prison when it opened in 1826, though it was not completed until 1828. The initial facility had 800 cells. The prison population rose in the mid-19th century, resulting in more construction. The 4-story complex was soon 6 stories, and the prison eventually housed more than 1,600 inmates because most of the early convicted criminals traveled by boat to Sing Sing. The press up to river came to men going to prison. Alexis de Tocqueville, the author of Democracy in America, notable visitor of the prison. and also the French government sent him and Gustave de Beaumont to the United States in 1831 to gather information about the American penal system. The two men were amazed at the total subjugation under which prisoners worked and the administrative power the warden wielded at Sing Sing. So this what uh, in this picture is Ilham Lens. So he was a warden prison. He resigned as warden of Sing Sing in 1830 and returned to Auburn in 1838. He was asked to leave that prison a year later after the death of a prisoner who was punished severely for feigning illness. Despite this record, Sing Sing rehired Lens in 1943. Whippings and floggings were commonplace punishment at Sing Sing. Frequently used was the cat o' nine tails, a cruel whipping contraption whose lashes were often tipped with metal or barbs. Its use was finally abolished by the New York State Legislature in 1848. In addition, while Lens was warden, inmates were expected to refrain from making noise, which included ticking. So, cat o' nine tails. So, this is the in this picture. This is the cat o' nine tails. The cat o' nine tails, commonly shortened to the cat, is a type of multi-tailed whip that originated as the implement for severe physical punishment, notably in the Royal Navy and British Army, and as a judicial punishment in Britain and some other countries. Frequently used was the cat o' nine tails, a cruel whipping contraption whose lashes were often tipped with metal or barbs. Its use was finally abolished by the New York State Legislature in 1848. In addition, while Lens was warden, inmates were expected to refrain from making noise, which included ticking. Electric chair is a method of execution originating in the United States in which the condemned person is strapped to a special belt wooden chair and electrocuted through electrodes fastened on the head and leg. Once the most widely used method of execution in the United States, electrocution was largely supplanted by lethal injection in the late 20th and early 21st centuries and is now used relatively rarely. The method applies one or more high voltage electrical currents through electrodes attached to the head and legs of a condemned inmate who sits strapped to a chair. A typical electrocution lasts about 2 minutes. So electrocution was first adopted in 1888 in New York as a quicker and more humane alternative to hanging. 2 years later, on August 6, 1890, New York State initiated its electric chair, executing William Kimler at Auburn State Prison in 1899. Martha Place became the first woman to be electrocuted. Kimmler's highly publicized execution was a grotesque and fiery butch. One New York Times reporter described the incidents in details, noting that it was awful, and the witnesses were so horrified by the ghastly sight that they could not take their eyes off it. Kimmler's face was bloody, his hair and skin scorched, and the death chamber stench and unbearable. According to the three doctors who conducted Kimmler's autopsy, there was extensive tearing of the body where the electrodes has been attached. Nevertheless, electrocution was soon adopted in other states, and by its peak in 1949 was the method of execution in 26 states. The U.S. Supreme Court has never rendered a judgment as to whether electrocution violates the U.S. Constitution's Eighth Amendment provision of cruel and unusual punishment. However, considerable evidence suggests that the method can inflict on the inmate unnecessary pain, indignity, and physical mutilation or severe external burning and bleeding. Documentation of witness execution has shown a substantial pattern of consecutive mishap. Court challenges over the decades, which began with the Kimmler cases, eventually led most states to abandon electrocution in favor of lethal injection. By the early 21st century, electrocution was one of two methods, the other being lethal injection, that an inmate could choose in several states. Nebraska was the last U.S. state to electrocution as the sole method of execution. In 2008, the Nebraska Supreme Court ruled it unconstitutional. Nevertheless, even a jurisdiction where it was permissible, electrocution was rarely employed, a sharp contrast from earlier practice. For example, from 1890 to 1972, when the Supreme Court commerced its moratorium on the death penalty, electrocution was used in 4,251 executions from 1976. When the Supreme Court ended the moratorium through the early 21st century, it had been used in about 160 executions. Electrocution was not been widely adopted outside the United States, though it was used in the Philippines until 1976. Sing Sing became notorious for its executions. Although the electric chair was developed at neighboring Auburn, almost all executions within the states were carried about the Sing Sing until 1963. The infamous death chair was later moved to Green Haven Prison. So this, in the left side of the slide, the left picture, this is the electric chair, and he was executed by electric chair. Thomas Matt Osborne, American penologist, born on September 23, 1859, Auburn, New York, US, and died October 20, 1926 at Auburn. American penologist whose inauguration of self-help programs for prisoners through mutual welfare leagues function as a model for the humanitarian programs of late penologists. Osborne served 2 terms on the Auburn Board of Education and in 1903 was elected mayor of Auburn, serving 1 term. In 1913, he became chairman of the New York State Commission on Prison Reform, a post that inspired him to spend a week in Auburn prison as Tom Brown to learn about conditions firsthand, convinced thereby that in the British statesman W.E. Gladstone praise, it is liberty alone that fits men for liberty. He founded a mutual welfare league of the Auburn prison, which assumed such responsibilities as performing communities to judge violation of prison's rule and to plan entertainment events. Osborne was warden 1914 to 1915 and 1916. So 3 years of Sing Sing State Prison, now Sing Sing Correctional Facility in Sing Sing, now Ossining, New York, and Commander 1917 to 1920 of the Portsmouth Naval Prison in New Hampshire. He instituted a mutual welfare league in both places. His administration at Sing Sing was a stormy one, culminating in an indictment by the Westchester County Grand Jury for perjury and neglect of duty. Because of his legal struggles, Osborne stepped down as warden in 1915. The charges, however, were dismissed, and Osborne resumed his post at Sing Sing in 1916, only the resign later that year. Osborne wrote many books of penology and founded a National Society for Dissemination of Penal Information. So, this is Thomas Mott Osborne. Auburn State Prison. This prison located in Auburn, New York. It was built on land that was once a Cayuga village. It is classified as a maximum security facility and opened in 1816. It established a disciplinary and administrative system based on silence, corporal punishment, and congregate, group, or labor. In architecture and routine, Auburn became the model for prisons throughout the United States. In the early 19th century, many Americans believed that in the industrialization and dramatic demographic, economic, and political upheavals had conspired against the traditional controls of family, church, and community. From their perspective, these moral guardians could no longer adequately control disorder. They saw crimes as the product of social chaos. Necessary it is eradication was a structured environment in which deviants could be separated from the disorder of society and the contagion of one another. Their solution was to create the penitentiary, a new institution for reforming offenders and ultimately restoring social stability. So this is the picture of Auburn State Prison in New York. Pennsylvania system was an early prison system requiring system inmate silence individual cells and inmate labor in those cells. Britain designed a unique 5-tiered cell block of 2 rows of single cells placed back to back in the center of the building. Cells measured only 3.5 feet or 1.06 meters wide, 7 feet or 2.3 meters long, and 7 feet or 2.1 meters high. Doors face outer walls lined with grated windows that provided indirect light and air. This pattern of small inside cell blocks was later adopted by most state prisons in the United States, whereas the Pennsylvania system inmates did handicraft work in their cells. Auburn prisoners labored in congregate workshop offsetting imprisonment caused by fulfilling private industry contracts. A hidden passageway with small opening surrounded the work area, allowing inspectors and visitors to surreptitiously monitor the inmates. Auburn briefly 1921 to 25 implemented the three-level classification system. Under it, minor offenders labored in workshop during the day and retired to separate cells at night. Serious offenders alternated their days between solitary confinement and congregate work. The most hardened criminals were placed in solitary confinement without work. After numerous suicides, instances of mental illness, and attempted escapes, the government of New York terminated the classification system and the experiment in solitary confinement. Subsequently, all male inmates work in congregate shop by day, returning to individual cells at night. Females first committed to Auburn in 1825 were relegated to a attic and excluded from regular work and exercise. To ensure that inmates did not corrupt one another, Britain's successor Elma Lynch enforced a quasi-military routine of absolute silence, strict discipline, and economic productivity. In response to bills, he'd 7 inmates dressed in trip clothing silently march in lockstep formation to and from their cells for meals and work assignments. Letters were banned and the chaplain was the only occasional visitors. Flogging and other forms of corporal punishment enforced the rules. Such regimentation was thought necessary to restrain the rebellious nature of the offenders. Eventually, overcrowding made a silent system unenforceable and Auburn system of discipline deteriorated into corrupt and lax routine of harsh punishment. After the Civic War, the spirit of reform withered and contract labor was no longer profitable. Despite the demise of the ideal system, Auburn remained the model for nearly a century, primarily because it had been inexpensive to conduct and maintain. Unlike Auburn or Sing Sing, Pennsylvania Eastern Penitentiary on 1829 was intended to keep convicts separate even as they work, in order to prevent any earthly contamination or destruction that might impede their repentance, hence the term penitentiary. Located on Cherry Hill on the outskirts of Philadelphia, Eastern represent one of the most imposing and expensive architectural achievements in the United States to date, and it contains innovations such as running water and flush toilets in all the cells. Although Beaumont and Tocqueville found it incontestable that this perfect isolation secures the prisoners from all fetal contamination, they favored the more cost-effective Auburn plan, which seemed more likely to enable states to profit from convict labor. So, Pennsylvania system penal method based on the principle that solitary confinement fosters penitence and encourages reformation. The idea was advocated by the Philadelphia Society for Alleviating the Miseries of Public Prison, whose most active members were Quakers. In 1929, the Eastern State Penitentiary on Cherry Hill in Philadelphia applied this so-called separate philosophy. Prisoners were kept in solitary confinement in cells 16 feet high, nearly 12 feet long, and 7.5 feet wide, or 4.9 by 3.7 by 2.3 meters. An exercise yard completely enclosed to prevent contact among prisoners was attached to each cell. Prisoners saw no one except institution officers and accusation visitors. Solitary penitence, however, was soon modified to include the performance of work such as shoe making and weaving. The Pennsylvania system spread until it predominated in European prisons. Critics in the United States argued that it was too costly and had deleterious effects on the mind of the prison. The Pennsylvania system was superseded in the United States by the Auburn system. So this is the picture of the Pennsylvania system. Different types of criminal punishment. The following are 5 of the most commonly seen types of criminal punishment. So first is incapacitation. Incapacitation seeks to prevent future crime by physically moving criminals away from society. This punishment can be tracked to ancient times. Terence Mitty and Hong Lu written in Punishment, a comparative historical perspective. But punishment was a common penalty in antiquity. Later, it was common for colonizing European countries to shape convicts and undesirables overseas. In modern times, house arrest, incarceration, and the death penalty are all forms of incapacitation. Bureau of Justice Statistic, or BGS, it has brought the effectiveness of the method into question. According to BGS data, about two-thirds or 67.8% of prisoners released back into society were arrested for a new crime within 3 years. About three-quarters, 76% were arrested within 5 years. Despite these findings, incapacitation is a common form of punishment in the United States. Next is the deterrence. The goal of deterrence is to persuade citizens and possible offenders or reoffenders to conform to the rules of law. Mitty and Law explain that four types of deterrence are generally recognized. So first, specific deterrence analyze how effective punishment is on an individual's future behavior. Second, general deterrence seeks to understand how individual punishment can deter others from committing crimes. Third, marginal deterrence seeks to reconcile how effective different types of punishment are as either specific or general deterrence. Fourth, partial deterrence refers to situation in which the threat of penalty has some deterrent value even when some engage in illegal behavior. For example, a criminal simply robbing a victim instead of also causing physical harm. The effective of deterrence as a criminal punishment is difficult to assess because people may follow the law for other reasons that may be challenging to track, such as religious or moral beliefs, physical incapacitation, or lack of opportunity. Next is retribution. As one of the oldest forms of punishment, retribution has roots in the Judeo-Christian tradition of justice. In her book Criminal Law, Lisa M. Storms explained that retribution prevents crime by giving victims or society a certain sense of satisfaction that a defendant has been punished appropriately, reinforcing the belief that the criminal justice system is working effectively. Modern examples of retribution include the widespread practices of imposing fines, as well as enforcing mandatory sentencing policies for certain offenses under the law. As an effective punishment, retribution has been criticized as being overly rigid and limited in its capacity to change societal behavior. However, it remains popular. Next is rehabilitation. A common prison policy in America up until the 1970s, rehabilitation focuses on helping criminals and prisoners overcome the barriers that lead them to committing criminal acts. This includes developing occupational skills as well as resolving psychological issues such as drug addiction and aggression, explains the American Psychological Association or APA. Condition the opposite of retribution. The ultimate purpose of rehabilitation is to transition offenders back into society. The APA reports that in examining massive data, individualized approaches to crime complemented with community-based approaches can prove effective in reducing offender recidivism. Next is restoration, a radical different approaches to criminal punishment. The goal of restoration is for the offender to make direct amends to both the victim and the community in which crime was committed. Although a relatively few practices in modern times, the concept of restorative justice can be found in the early legal system of Western Europe, ancient Hebrew justice and pre-colonial African societies. During the process of restoration, victims initiate a process in which both they and the offender meet to share feelings and concerns. The dialogue offers victims the opportunity to be heard and the offender to make amends and receive forgiveness. Restorative justice is often used in crimes involving youth offenders. Age of Enlightenment. The Age of Enlightenment, also known as the Enlightenment, was an intellectual and philosophical movement that dominated Europe in the 17th and 18th centuries with global influences and effects. During the Enlightenment, the they produced numerous books, essays, inventions, scientific discoveries, laws, wars, and revolution. The American and French Revolution were directly inspired by Enlightenment ideals and respective marked the peak of its influence and the beginning of its decline. The main idea of age Enlightenment, a philosophical movement that dominated Europe during the 18th century, was centered around the idea that reason is the primary source of authority and legitimacy, and advocates such ideas as liberty, progress, tolerance, fraternity, constitutional government, and separation of church and state. These are the three main ideas: reason, individualism, skepticism. The five so this, the five idea of enlightenment. Decism emerged as a theological position that attempted to define the natural world and man's relationship to God through the application of enlightenment ideals such as reason, rationality, and order. Liberalism. Liberals believe that any given social and political order emanated from human interaction, not from divine will. Next is republicanism. During the Enlightenment, anti-monarchism extended beyond the civic humanism of the Renaissance. Classical republicanism, still supported by philosophers such as Rousseau and Montesquieu, was only one of several theories seeking to limit the power of monarchies rather than directly opposing them. Conservatism is a type of political belief that supports emphasis on traditions and relies on the individual to maintain society. The term was first used by Francois René de Chateaubriand in 1818 during the Bourbon Restoration, which wanted to roll back the policies of the French Revolution. Tolerance and scientific progress. One of the most important developments that the Enlightenment era brought to the discipline of science was its popularization. An increasingly literate population seeking knowledge and education in both the arts and the science drove the expansion of print culture and the dissemination of scientific learning. Personalities behind correctional institution. Cesar Beccaria, in full Cesar Bunisana. Marquis de Beccaria, born March 15, 1738 in Milan, Italy. Died November 28, 1794 in Milan, Italian. Criminologist and economist whose Dilititi in Diliponi 1764, or English translation J.A. per Crimes and Punishment in 1880, was celebrated volume on the reform of criminal justice. Beccaria was the son of a Milanese aristocrat, the modest man. From an early age, he displayed the essential traits of his character, a highly volatile temperament resulted in periods of enthusiasm followed by depression and inactivity. He was reserved and somewhat taciturn in his social contacts, but placed great value on his personal and family relationships. At the age of 8, he was sent to the Jesuit school in Parma. Beccaria later described the education he received there as fanatical and stifling to the development of human feelings. Although he revealed a mathematical aptitude titled in his student, this gave indication of the remarkable intellectual achievements that were soon to follow. In 1758, he received a degree in law from the University of Pavia. In 1760, Beccaria proposed marriage to the 16-year-old Teresa Blasco. Encountered the obdurate opposition of his father. The following year, the marriage took place without parental consent, and the young couple began their life together in poverty. The breach between father and son was ultimately repaired, and Beccaria and his wife were received into the family home. In 1762, a daughter, the first of his 3 children, was born. So this is Cesar Beccaria, an Italian economist and proponent of judicial reform. Cesar Beccaria was the author of the most famous Italian work of the Enlightenment on Crimes and Punishment, 1764. He was born into a noble family of the state of Milan, which was part of the Austrian Habsburg Empire and was called by the Jesuit in Parma. So Berry Beccaria and their cohort wished to modernize and rationalize the economy and the legal system in line with Enlightenment secular morality, and they supported governmental reform on crimes and punishment. Was first published in 1764 with subsequent edition following rapidly. Cesar Beccaria believed that people have a rational manner and apply it toward making choices that will help them achieve their own personal gratification. In Beccaria's interpretation, law exists to preserve the social contract and benefit society as a whole. Cesar Lombroso, the father of modern criminology, his theory was born of criminal. He was born on November 6, 1835, and died on October 19, 1909. Was the founder of Italian School of Positivist Criminology. He rejected the established classical school, which held the crime was a characteristic trait of human nature and that rational choices were the foundation of behavior. Lombroso, using a specific approach and concepts drawn from physiognomy, early eugenics, psychiatry, and social Darwinism, argued that criminality was inherited and that the born criminal could be identified by physical defect which confine a criminal as savage or atavistic. So this is Cesar Lombroso. So William the Conqueror. William the First, by name William the Conqueror or William the Bastard or William the Normandy, Prince Guillaume Le Quinc or Guillaume Le Bastard or Guillaume de Normandy. So this William the Conqueror, on born c 1028 Falaise, Normandy, died 9 September 9 1087, ruined Duke of Normandy as William II from 1035 and King of England as William I from 1066, one of the greatest soldiers and rulers of the Middle Ages. He made himself the mightiest noble in France and then changed the course of in England's history by his conquest of that country. So this is William the Conqueror. So Enrico Ferri, born in Lombardy in 1856, an Italian criminologist, socialist, and student of Cesare Lombroso, the founded of the Italian School of Criminology. While Lombroso reached the purported physiological factors that motivated criminals, Ferri investigated social and economic aspects. Ferri, at the time a regale, was elected to Italian Parliament in 1866. In 1893, he joined the Italian Socialist Party and edited their daily newspaper, the Avanti. In 1900 and 1904, he spoke out in Congress against the roles of socialist minister and bourgeoisie governments. Ferri favored Italian neutrality during World War I and he was re-elected as a socialist party deputy in 1921. In post-war Italy, he became a supporter of Mussolini's fascist regime. Ferri died in 1929. Now, Ferri summarized his theory by defining criminal psychology as a defective resistance to criminal tendencies and temptation due to that ill-balanced impulsiveness which characterize children and savages. Part of the reason Ferri rejected biological determinism was because of his political belief. Ferri identified as socialist and wrote frequently about socialism in his work, including 1894 Socialism and Positive Science. So this is Enrico Ferri. Clifford Shaw, Rob Shaw, 1895 to 1957, an American sociologist and criminologist. He was a major figure in the Chicago School of Sociology during the 1930s and 1940s, and he is considered to be one of the most influential figures in American criminology. His work on juvenile delinquency with Henry D. Mackay, conducted in the late 1920s, played a pivotal role in moving the study of such delinquency toward the discipline of sociology and away from psychology and psychiatry. Henry D. Mackay an American sociologist and criminologist who along with Clifford Shaw, helped to establish the University of Chicago's Sociology Department as the leading program of its kind in the United States. He and Shaw were both considered members of the Chicago School of Sociology. Shaw and Mackay works span three general areas studying geographic variation in rates of juvenile delinquency, study of autobiographic works by delinquencies, and the development of Chicago's era project, a delinquency prevention program in the Chicago area. The two studies published by Shaw and Mackay in the 1930s and 1940s were still held in high regard among social scientists in the 1970s. So this is Clifford Shaw and Henry Mackay. Mackay or Maki. That's all. Thank you.